G'day, welcome back. Just a quick video today, sort of video I don't normally do. I'm actually covering a very recent game, the game by Gukesh and Aronian in the Singerfield Cup. Now, the reason why I've looked at this game is that I was alerted to it by Sagar Shah of Chess Space India, where he has a very good 15-minute video covering the game and some of the aspects of it. Let's see if I can bring that up. Okay, so his thumbnail is the bottom thumbnail, good thumbnail, and then he also has in the description sort of the oh my god is now the latest meme in chess. Obviously, Carlsen quite dramatically and Gukesh less dramatically. And the whole issue here is that there was an interesting double blunder, let us say, in the end game. And when I originally saw the video, I thought, okay, Gukesh must have missed a win. And actually, the position we're talking about is Aronian missed a win. But it sort of petered out to a draw after that. There is a twist in the tail. We'll get to that in a second. However, I found this quite interesting because when you look at the position on the thumbnail, what you notice is that actually it's a bishop endgame, and it kind of links in with that recent work I did on the Centurini position. How can the bishop stop a pawn, and what length of diagonal is needed to stop it, and all that sort of stuff. Well, this is a rook versus bishop endgame, so there's some other factors going on. So I thought it'd be quite interesting, a bit fun, just to have a look at what is going on and why this is an oh my god situation. So let's just quickly switch over to the analysis screen and start having a look at that. Okay, so first off, let's just have an overview of the position. So black has just played h5, 67th move, and this sort of put some annotations on just to sort of understand what's going on here. First thing to look at there is the pawn on a7, threatening to go to a8, ties the rook down to the 8th rank unless it's making a check or something like that, and gives the rook no field of action on the rest of the board. And then if you have a look at the black threat, the h-pawn has to be stopped by the bishop in one form or another. And you can see I've marked out there's a very short diagonal, which obviously won't be able to stop. A couple of longer diagonals it could be on, which might be useful, but it's all a question of if it can get to that diagonal quickly enough. As you can see, that Gukesh was pushing earlier in the game, but in this position, then black would be the only person sort of harboring winning chances. And just the final point I want to make is that in a lot of situations, I mean, it depends upon where the white king ends up. In a lot of situations, when the black rook sacks itself for this a pawn, and if the white bishop sacrifices itself for the black pawn, often the black king is close enough to get back, capture the e pawn, and win the game. Not in all cases, and we'll go in a couple of lines where that is not the case. So that's just these are the sort of the tactics that you are looking at. How can the bishop stop the pawn? If we do go into a king-pawn endgame, how do I draw it? Okay, now, bishop f2 was played, and that was a potentially losing move. Let's just have a look. Bishop f2 was played, and then the winning moves here, there's two winning moves, king g4 and king f4. We'll look at them in a minute. But what Aronian played was he played rook a8, and then the game basically petered out to a draw after that. So we go back here. We're going to be looking at king g4 mainly, and we might briefly look at king f4, but king g4 is the main point. And basically what's happening is you are driving the bishop away from the key diagonals, stopping the pawn. So let's see how that... What I'm going to do first is go back to this position before bishop f2 is played, and just sort of, it will help later in terms of understanding what the drawing lines actually are. Right, there's one very good drawing strategy, which is king to c7. Now let's see how this works. We're actually threatening to block the rook with the bishop and promote the pawn. So there's only two defensive strategies here. One is rook blocks, and we can attack the rook. Rook has to move, and we can actually, the easiest thing is just to go back to c7, and now the rook will have to go back to a8. The alternative is a check, but then we can go to b6 or to b8, and the position will kind of repeat itself because we'll have to check, and now we're going to go back there and threaten to block again. So basically this is a very easy drawing strategy for white in this position. And the other drawing approach is remarkable. Bishop g3 also draws, would you believe it? Now this is why I wanted to cover this first, because the thing about bishop g3 is I think that's crazy. How on earth does bishop g3 draw? Well, let's go through the line. The logical thing here is let's attack that bishop. It actually even looks worse than bishop f2 because we can attack the bishop. But the funny thing about that is, let's go sit there. What are we going to do? Because the king, wherever the king is there, it'll be able to cover those two squares. And if the king is there, it'll be able to cover those two squares, but it can't cover all three squares on the diagonal. And remember, the rook, it's an imaginary covering of a square. So, so basically, we sort of continue attack the bishop. Bishop walks back there. There is a line to consider though. Basically, let's have a look. So the only alternative here is actually like this. We're going to make sure that the rook gives itself up for the pawn, and the bishop will give itself up for the pawn. So you can see that's actually losing. So we shouldn't be doing that. Let's get back a few moves. And basically, what black should be doing in this position is just hassling the bishop permanently. Bishop must stay on the button. Hassle the bishop. And once again, it's another of these sort of repeating positions where the position is drawn. So that should have been the way to draw using the amazing bishop to g3 line. Okay, so that variations like that pop up later on. So I just wanted to sort of cover those two sort of drawing themes, one from white side and one from black side. And let's go back to the original bishop to f2 oversight and see what the winning strategy there is. Okay, so there's a few lines here. The rook is attacking the bishop, but the bishop does not have to move. But let's have a look at the first line given here, which is king g1. This is the one that Chagasar covered in this video, I believe. Very quickly, bishop g1. Now, do not push the pawn, because then we get the bishop on this diagonal, and we just saw that the bishop can maintain itself on that diagonal. But what you do is you play king to g3. So now that the bishop is, it's really trapped with, it's not going to be able to stop this diagonal, it's too short, and the pawn will just advance through. And it cannot get back on to that diagonal from the other side, and of course this pawn is causing quite a problem, right? So the sort of line it gives, you've got to do something, right? Bishop attacks the rook or something with the rook, and it's too slow. The bishop can't get back into the window. That's really so I think, okay, let's try bishop there. That looks like it's blocking it. But then the continuation now is, this is an unfortunate situation we've talked about before. Threaten the rook, take it. And the problem here, as we mentioned a couple of times, is that white is out of time. So that's one variation. If after king to g4, white had played bishop to g1. We can try other lines. So let's try bishop c5 straight away. Same idea, a variation. Right? Same thing. Rook sits in the corner, and you're going to be one tempo too late. And if you go back and try and stop that, the bishop, it all works out the same. Go back to this king g4 move. It's just a killer. But that trying bishop to e3. The pawn's moved through too quickly, and you're not going to be able to stop it. You can't get back onto this diagonal. If you're on that diagonal already, it'll be okay. You can't get back onto that diagonal. Yeah, I guess you thought that was over, but you know, there is a real sting in the tail here. That not just this double blunder later in the match, and remember, we're not looking at these blunders because these are obviously great players and they're in time trouble and they're analysing the whole game, but we can learn a lot in our own games if we can understand what sort of strategies, techniques, and patterns to look for in the endgame. Okay, so what is a sting in the tail? So I'll go over quickly a little bit here of my sort of analysis technique, by the way. What I've been using here is Skid. And the first thing I did with this game is I loaded it up again, I loaded it up and I analysed it using the Skid annotate function. I'll just bring that up so we can have a look at how it works. Something like this. There's that little notepad thing there, and it pops up this annotation tab here. You do depth moves you want. I normally do about 30. 30. You can do a few parameters here when you stop analysis, what to consider a blunder. You add the score for all the moves, you add variation for all the moves and so on, and you just let it run. And basically, you choose the position you want to start from, or you do the whole game, does an analysis, and then you can have a look at it. Now, there's a nice little function here, score graph. And will you look at that? We've been looking at that blunder on move at 68, but actually something happened on move 58 as well. So let's have a closer look at the position then. Okay, so a bit of a quick assessment of the position. You can see this is where white had been pushing for a while. He's got the extra 2 pawns. But now that the black rook is active, can check the white king a lot of opportunities. He's got back more to sort of a more balanced position. But now the next move by Aronian is actually a pretty bad blunder. Let's have a look at what he played. He played, it's just showing there that a rook to g3 or whatever, everything's fine. But he played bishop to d3. Obviously trying to exchange off the white squared bishops, and then he might even have the edge in sort of a rook versus bishop endgame to still be drawn. In the game, Gukesh played king to a c5, and the game went on. It was almost like didn't even realize what had happened. And just to quickly look at, for instance, we'll just look at one line where if white takes, black takes, bishop is attacked, bishop moves there, and then there's actually a very good several ways to draw. This is a very good drawing technique. It just cuts the white king off completely, and white won't be able to make enough progress in that scenario. Problem is that white does not have to take straight away, and in fact there's a better line where he attacks the rook. So now the bishop won't be attacked when the pieces are exchanged. Now, actually, there's a few funny lines here. Actually, the best computer line actually is given as rook to e4 check, which you wouldn't really believe, would you? Black now is in a lot of trouble, whatever he tries. So let's have a look at a few sample lines. So what we're going to look at is three alternatives. One is you hold the bishop by keeping the rook on the third rank. The other one is exchanging bishop straight away. And the other one is this weird rook to e4 check. So let's go through each of those in turn. Let's try exchanging bishop first, and let's see what happens in this line. Take the rook, and you end up with this position where white has a 2-pawn advantage. And ends up with a lot of passed pawns, which the black light squared bishop cannot handle. Particularly, you're either going to end up with... So you can see the white king is moving around. Just continue the line, see what happens. F6, hold that pawn. So it's going to cost... This pawn will cost the bishop. Although the exact line is not critical, this position is winning for white. Got too many outside pass pawns and so on, and the bishop can't manage all of them. Okay, so let's have a look at a slightly different line. Rather than taking the bishop straight away, let's do the, this is the hold the bishop line. Let's see what white's winning strategy is. Now he grabbed the bishop, and we can advance our king. And this position's also winning. You can see the white king. White king's going to be threatening this pawn, and there's going to be passed pawns on this side of the board as well. And once again, the black can't deal with all these threats. Okay, now the rook's tied down. We're going to take that pawn, and obviously that's going to be winning for white. And then the third possibility to be looking at is the weird one, as I mentioned, the rook e4 check. We find that, yeah, rook e4 check. And actually, this as well, the computer line is not to take it straight away. So once again, if the rook moves, we're gonna lose the bishop outright. So we're gonna do something else. Bishop retreats to b1, so that's okay. We can hold there. Bishop to c5. I mean, black's almost in the zugzwang here, improving our dark squared bishop. Advancing, got two passed pawns. You can see there that something like that was going to happen at some stage. The computer still regards this as winning. Obviously, we're going to pick up that pawn, and then the rook will have to sacrifice itself, and that's sort of the way that that continuation works. Plus 10 already, according to the engine. That's probably going to find mate if I let the analysis engine run a little bit longer. Basically, we go back to this position, bishop d3, just because of these tactics. It's once again one of those situations where you have to understand some of the endgame tactics. And the second thing is understanding the transition to other endgames, like the king and pawn endgames in the early example, or in this case, transitions to bishops on opposites, but with such a preponderance and a pawn advantage that the game would still be lost. Okay, I found that very interesting, looking at this fascinating game between Gukesh and Aronian, and hopefully we can learn a few lessons about how to analyze our own endgames. So I hope you enjoyed that, and thank you very much for watching.